Welcome back, everybody, to the Wild Faith Podcast. My name is Evan Bungham. I have my co-host Luke Timmons with me here today. We are on episode 73, and we are doing a deep dive on e-scouting, specifically talking about hill country, farm country, and the ins and outs of running through onX. Luke, how you doing tonight?
Good, man. Good stuff.
One day closer to the opener.
Yeah, it's crazy that August is just a couple days away.
It's summer. It's kind of, we had our end of the year, so a group that we do with a youth archery camp hunt. We had our last day tonight, which was pretty fun. We had 16 kids, which is a bunch, but to close it out, and that's a sign that every year that I know that fall is right around the corner, especially, being back home this last week and seeing some velvet bucks and stuff. So tis the season.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's blink and it'll be here before we know it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so have you had a chance to kind of do any prep work so far in Wisconsin? Getting ready for stuff outside of shooting your bow?
Just getting the bow dialed.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's been busy, like crazy busy for me anyways, with new job and getting settled in. So
oh yeah,
it'll all come.
Yeah, this was it was nice to get home for a weekend. Since Millie's been coming here, she's been star guest here for the last couple episodes. But no, I was able to get home. We got about an acre of food plots in. We still have about 3 left to put in. But we got some done, got a bunch of trails cleaned, which I think is kind of for naught. We'll see, because I know we just had that Dorado or whatever, how you pronounce that, came through, and a lot of people lost trees. So I'm kind of hoping that there isn't a whole bunch more trees that went down. So I got to redo it again. But yeah, it was good. Got cameras up, got some nice photos of some velvet bucks that are in the area. We got a couple of nice 3.5-year-olds I saw. Pretty exciting. I mean, it's for the 3 days that we're home, I feel like got a lot done. I definitely feel like I'm stressing a little bit because there's still a lot more to get done, but at the same point in time, that's kind of why I appreciate you and Eric and all the help that you guys have put in through the years, because most of that work is done. It's just a little touch-up stuff. So it's exciting, man. Outside of shooting our bow, like I'm pumped. It's go time.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, man, it's right around the corner. But, today just wanted to kind of do a deep dive onto how we do, e-scouting for today, specifically whitetails. Like you said, looking at farm country, looking at hill country.
We could talk about hill country ducks.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, there's just the different nuances that come in with both. So, you want to start with farm country?
Sure, why not?
All right, sweet. Let's do it. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Anyone listening on the audio is kind of just going to have to listen along. If you really want to get more out of this, definitely go check out the YouTube page for this one. But yeah, let me share my screen here. Yeah, I need the Jeopardy music. All right, so starting off with farm country. This is just kind of a tract of public land that I just randomly kind of chose here, from Minnesota. What are you kind of looking for right off the bat? Like, what's the first kind of stuff you start keying in on?
For sure. So right off the bat, and I know you're kind of like my eyes and hands behind the wheel here. First thing I'm going to look for is where can I access? So maybe highlight any access points. I see some road access for sure, and then I think there's one down in the corner just from looking at this earlier. So for sure, like when I'm looking, we're talking farm country in specific for this one, but any piece of public, usually my first bat is I'm like, where can I get into this property? And this particular one looks like it's at least it looks decent in size. Yeah. And it does look like, it's got egg for sure surrounding it. I don't know if in the middle there that looks like there's egg inside. I'm going to guess that's maybe right CRP in there.
Well, let's use the old onX
Perfect timing.
Yeah. So going in on this one, there's a layer here called trees, crops, and soil. And there's a whole bunch of different stuff. If you turn on the crop distribution, and I'll
Oh
just do
my gosh, it
corn
is.
and
Would
soybeans, corn
would
and
not have
beans.
guessed that. Wow.
But yeah, so just kind of looking here, it's never 100% accurate, but it's
Mm-hmm.
pretty darn close. At least, like you said, it'll give you an idea of even this little field out front here.
Yeah.
Corn, there's this little pasture here. Right in the middle of this, there's a pasture. So it does give you a good idea of like, okay, I know there's food here, right?
Yeah. Well, that's good to know. So, that's the crazy thing about talking about farm country is where when cover's sparse, these deer could be bedded in the middle of a cornfield beneath a couple different trees. And they're like, we're looking at this one in particular here, like this is exactly that. It looks like there's maybe a driveway going to a house there, but that is literally just a tree line in the middle of potentially a bean field or cornfield. And we're talking about mature whitetails, we're talking 3.5 or older. That's a perfect spot where a buck could stage up. If you wanted to move to a destination food plot, he certainly could, but he can get up and out of his bed there. But we're talking in particular this piece of public, so if you can kind of just go back to like a full on zoom. When I'm looking at this spot, like I said, access to food, and then we start to kind of break down the different terrain features. So we're looking at this one looks like it has a river. The cool thing that you can look at on this too is where Onyx has a new feature within using the topo layer and LiDAR, which if you really look at it now, you can really get to see those depths of how deep some of those creek beds are, especially like on the east side. You can see that it's actually got some depth to it and some ridges where you can see those banks. And
Yep.
sometimes, if it's a dry year, you could use that to your advantage of getting in and out of that property, especially if you're trying to get deeper into an area. But, the one hard thing about public hunting, and I'm sure anybody that's listening to this knows this, and if anybody listens to Dan Infault or anybody like that or the hunting public guys, is like, your access is your most important thing if it's public or if it's private. But it's the funny thing about hunting public is where you're literally hunting people probably more so than you are hunting bucks. You're trying to get away from people. You're trying to separate yourself from the competition. And, sometimes people, especially nowadays, that they've all listened to all these podcasts, all these different YouTube shows where they are diving into those really deep and nitty gritty spots. And sometimes they're pushing deer back that are sitting right by the cover of the axis of getting in. They're watching you walk in because,
Right.
those older deer aren't dumb. But so just picking out some key spots because we're keeping this kind of short and sweet. So the one thing I'm always looking for in egg country, I'm looking for corner pockets, especially when we have the ability to have like egg access like this. And this is kind of maybe more in particular talking about early season, and then maybe I'll throw a couple notes into like later in October into the end of the season because these spots will transition to them too. So when we're talking about some inside pockets, so like right by the first one's actually right by the axis, right by the lake here, or a little pond, whatever that is. So see if you zoom in right in that area, that first corner right there where that food touches
Yeah.
the backside of that pond, that's a perfect little pinch spot. And if you were to throw back on the food later, because I actually have it popped up on my end, it looks like you've got some oaks to the north of you, and then whatever that is, corn, soybeans. It'd be even better if it was soybeans. But at the same time, that's a great little inside pinch point of where you're going to get those deer transitioning potentially from that. I would look and see, if I'm looking at it, you can see there's an oxbow back on the river behind that big heavy tree cover.
Right.
Maybe there's a couple trees in there that you might have a mature whitetail bedding under. Maybe he's going to transition from there through that thick timber to get out to that destination egg field, and you might be able to catch him kind of coming on that inside pocket. And depending on how the property's laid out, I'm going to assume that that's on a lower, just looking at the 2D, that might be some lower area. So your thermals might be actually dropping down to that corner as well. Which is actually a good tree stand spot too, because talking in the evening time, your thermals are going to drop probably into that pond behind you. So that's one spot. So now, if you do a zoom out again, so I want to talk about another spot. There's another inside pocket on that You're almost right on it, right there. Yep,
Right
right
here.
there. There's another inside pocket right there. Same thing where I'm looking at this. The thing that intrigues me about this property, assuming that the big deer, rather talking from outside the in, that these deer are buried into this piece of public, is where I think, in terms of that marsh aspect and the river aspect, is like there's a lot of spots in there that predators can't get to, people don't want to get to. And like I
Mm-hmm.
look at all those inside trees, all these oxbows that exist on that river, like so many potential areas for these big bucks to bed, to work their way out in the evening times, to get out to that food source. So that's where like that there's another inside pocket there on those trees that looks like could
Mm-hmm.
potentially be really good. And there's probably two or three more. But the nice thing, talking about this again later into the year now, is
Mm-hmm.
where you look at the structure and the hierarchy of how these deer bed. Typically the bucks are bedded the furthest away from everybody, and they're in the remote areas. And then you start bringing into maybe that second year group of bucks, so where you're talking about your 2.5-year-olds, your younger deer that are kind of bedded by or maybe on the outskirts of those doe family groups, because like those doe family groups are going to be tight to food. That's just how they bed and how they work, and they're bedding with 5, 6 sets of does, maybe a couple fawns, but those bucks are bedded by themselves, especially the mature ones. They're not bedded up with 4 or 5 other bucks and a bunch of does. They're getting the hell away from everybody else. So when I look at food like this, and looking at cover, there's lots of spots inside there where, within maybe 60 to 100 yards, you might have that first layer of where you're going to have your does and your fawns and your immature bucks that are bedding. And then I
Mm-hmm.
usually flip that back about another maybe 100 to 250 yards to where those, mature whitetails might be bedding. And that's where it's like these spots where I'm talking about these inside pockets on these eggs here, of where you might get these doe family groups that are bedding relatively within a close proximity to those areas, just because food's right there. There's cover, good cover right there. And, transitioning into the later part of the season when we start getting into October, November, I just think of scrape lines. That's my favorite thing to hunt, of where, those are active areas. They're on field edges. They're inside transitions of thick cover and woods. Like, what a perfect area for those deer to get downwind of those doe family groups. Excuse me. Get downwind of those doe family groups and start running those scrape lines and checking for, if there's any does that are coming to the heat. So, this is kind of just a super brief outline. The biggest thing that I'm going to say, though, is like when you're looking at a map like this particular property, the first time I'm just looking at it right now, oh my gosh, swallowed the bug, is it looks thick, it looks nasty, but you can't really tell though until you get boots on the ground. That's the biggest thing, is like you can e-scout all you want and you might get there and realize that it looks completely different. You might find
Mm-hmm.
out that some of that stuff that you thought was marsh ended up being CRP grass, and it's not cattails and willows and stuff like that. It's just CRP. Or you might find out that egg field is actually a sweet corn and it got picked and there's actually nothing there, and that does nothing for you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where it's good to get, do your due diligence of e-scouting, get boots on the ground. And this is a great time, it's in the off season right now, or I should say preseason, really. Get out and go scout. It's not going to hurt anything. It's public ground. Go out,
Mm-hmm.
scout, get boots on the ground, get an assessment of what the property and what the layout looks like. And then it's always good to scout mid. I am, especially in public ground, I am scouting every time that I'm out hunting. I like to pick my spot of where I want to go, but I'm really hunting fresh sign. That's my number 2 thing, is hunt fresh sign. And it's one thing to go out and find a spot that you think looks really good, but then, you just walked by 2 scrapes that were in a spot that maybe you didn't think looked that good on the map, but there's fresh sign right there, and maybe that's a spot you should have hunted, but it's probably already too late because you walked by it.
Sure.
So those are just some things. The only other thing I'd throw into here, but it doesn't necessarily really apply with most farm country stuff, because most farm country, I would say, is primarily flat. I know you can turn on between the LiDAR radar. Oh my gosh, LiDAR. The LiDAR layer. There's another layer we can turn on in terms of hill features. I can't remember where it's buried at, but it just kind of shows you basically like ridge lines and the depths of those ridge lines. I have it pulled up on mine right now, so you can see it subtle little changes in the topography, especially when we're talking about like marshy flat grounds. There might be only a couple high spots in that marsh that might have an oak island or something like that on it, where that might be a primary spot for a big buck to go bed. So nope, just some little tips and stuff that I would look at if I am, the first time kind of looking at this property, of what I would do in terms of just pick and stand locations. Like I said, access is your most important thing. How can I get in, get out? Number 2 is going to be figuring out where's food. And then number 3 is kind of figuring out where those doe bedding groups going to be at, and then kind of putting that picture all together, and then getting boots on the ground and just putting all that information into one. And biggest thing is get out and hunt, man. You're only going to get out there if you only go out once. You know what? You're just kind of holding yourself back. So get out, strike when the iron's hot, hunt fresh sign, and yeah, that's what I got.
How would you go about, like if we turn on like just current wind? Let's see if it does it here. I mean, predominantly you're going to have some sort of westerly wind. How would you go about accessing if you're going to hang a stand here?
Sure. So you're talking about that particular one right there?
Yeah.
All right. So first you're gonna need to take some time, develop some type of boat or watercraft with a mast on it.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. No, so I'm looking at this right now. This is where you kind of need to be a little froggy and just go. This is where you just kind of got to do a little bit more than what other people don't want to do. Look at the roads right there, but in between you and the road looks like there potentially could be a lot of good marsh potential bedding.
Yeah.
You could certainly, it's hard to say how big that river is. Could you float down it? Maybe. Would I? No. But because you're going to be getting right to where I think those deer are going to be bedding at. So looking at it from the north side up there, if you just unzoom a little bit, looks like you're going to put some boots and miles on, but if you could park up on the north side there, looks like you can loop down. If you go a little bit farther down there, looks like there's that green plot right there in the middle. Looks like you can loop around. You can
parking right here.
Yep, you can cut through. Looks like there's a gate opening there. You can loop through that ag. In terms of we'll just say it's corn. If it's corn, I think you're pretty good, because I don't think those deer. I know deer bed in corn, but I don't necessarily think they are. I think it's probably going to be your best access if you could slipping through there. But also a thing to think about too, if it is corn, are those deer really going to be pushing to get out to eat out in the corn in the middle of the night? Maybe not till end of November or middle of November before they pick it. But if it's beans, that's the thing that you got to be conscious about, of where it's like, all right, what time are you getting out the stand? You might have to get out early to beat those deer that get to the field. Right. Or in the morning time, you're going to have to be conscious about when you're getting out to the stand, because you might be reverse roll that, bumping them off the egg before they're getting back to bedding. Oh, sorry, I swallowed a bug. But the biggest thing I would say in terms of your access is, where can I get in clean and where can I get out clean? And sometimes you're going to have to sacrifice, maybe bumping a couple deer to make that happen. And I think it's relative too to think about how many times you're going to get to that spot. It's public land. Someone else could go hunt there tomorrow, or they could be there that day before. You don't really have the ability to know that. So in terms of public on the spot, I'm a little more of a risk taker, of where it's, if I bump a couple deer getting into spot knowing I'm trying to kill a deer or a certain type of caliber deer, I'm willing to kind of sacrifice that. But if you pull up another example, maybe go to the one down on the southeast side. So that one's another pretty clean entry getting in and out.
Yeah.
If you're looking at, you can just kind of, actually, is that private though?
Down here is private, yeah.
Okay, so it does look like you can just hug that inside edge of the of the pond there and get in that way. And you could also reverse that. You could go in the opposite way. You could come in from the north as well. But I'm trying to think of, give me a hard one here for access wise. Let's find another. So maybe
if you're hunting this hardwood here.
Yeah, so that southeast corner down there. So yeah,
down in here.
Left, right there. So that inside, yep. So like right, nope, more right. Yeah, right in there. So like that's a really good. Actually, looking at that now, unzoom just a little bit so we can
Mm-hmm.
see more of that. So that little corridor down there, that's actually a cool spot. So it looks like you got two inside edges going into thick cover inside the middle of that egg there. So then, if you just draw a box from, yeah, draw a box inside there from like, I wish I could scroll my mouse in there. But if you just imagine a little bit of a box down there between those two transitions of cover, you got hardwoods to like looks like some thick
Are you talking
stuff to
down
this.
here?
No, to the southeast.
This
So,
stuff?
yep. So like from the hardwoods to that stuff, and then you
Mm-hmm.
look at it. There's two inside corner pockets from two sides of ag right there. So I
Mm-hmm.
look at it. That's a in my opinion, would be a heck of a travel corridor going between back and forth of those. So if I was accessing to those, I'm not afraid to walk through ag. So talking about your only access point really is going to be from the east. I don't think there's any way from the from the west
Well, you'd be a long walk, but you could do it.
you could do it. Potentially if there was a fence line and you could just walk that fence line, that would be pretty amazing too. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you're going to have to walk through that ag to get down there. And yeah, I'm trying to see. Yeah, I would just cut straight through and get down the egg. So I guess that one isn't too hard of a spot to access either. But the biggest thing I would say is like being very conscious of like you don't want to blow if it's a northwest wind and you're assuming that
Yep.
those deer are bedding into that thick cover to the south. I'd be very conscious about like how far I'm going into that maybe that hard timber right there because
Mm-hmm.
there's that fine line of where it's like, all right, I really think he's betting on that that southwest edge right in there. Well, I'm probably not going to push the envelope and go sit in the middle of that woods because I'm going to be blowing my wind right back in there. I might just hunt that inside corner, yeah, like right there where I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of my scent window,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm still going to be able to get the hunt the majority, and vice versa too. If it's a southeast wind, which is I think is a great wind, or excuse me, a northeast wind, you might have to loop around the opposite way of that big timber and come in from the west to get into that spot too.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, the biggest thing is just this is the fun part. I love e-scouting. Am I a wizard at it or do I know everything? No. This is just from stuff that I've done the same thing from watching YouTube videos, reading books,
Mm-hmm.
listening to other people online. And a lot of this is too of where, and I think the hunting public actually just came out with a really cool video on this of where you could do all this stuff and put all this stuff together. But the biggest thing is just having a little bit of woodsmanship, being able to understand fresh sign, understand what's happening real time in the woods, I think is a really big thing that's going to help you to have more success. Let the sign, let the deer kind of tell you what's happening. You can only do so much looking at this virtual map, until you get boots on the ground and you get out there is when you really start to see like the sign and things start to, tell the story of like what's going on.
Yeah. What do you think? Should we switch it on up to hill country?
Yeah,
All right, let's do it.
do
I'm
it.
gonna stop sharing just to move on over there. What are some like as I pull this up here? Some like just quick, kind of not hidden features within Onyx, but like some other features that aren't necessarily marking spots,
So
but more
yeah,
get at.
my one so particularly like where I live, we central Minnesota here, we have a really good mix of everything from ag to big woods to hill country to farm country and just kind of everything in between. But a lot of the stuff that we have up here, it's a pretty known thing, and the further north you get, it's even more common, is where we have a whole lot of timber cuts and timber harvest. So that's probably one of my biggest things where I look at that is like, if I see that, it's 2025, if I see that there's a 2019, 2022, whatever it is, within 5 years of a timber harvest, that's a free food plot sitting right there. And that I know that's going to bed a ton of deer. It's going to harbor a ton of deer, and it's free food for the deer. So I'm always looking for that. That's a sweet feature, that Onyx option. It's pretty accurate too. I love to. I'm guilty. I love to copy my waypoints and use that as my GPS markers probably more than I use Google Maps, which is pretty funny. So like I'll go look on Onyx, get a, it doesn't matter if I'm like going to a friend's house, whatever. Like I'll pull up an Onyx, be like, I think I know how they get it here, and then I'll just copy the waypoint and I'll paste that into Google, and then I track everything. I'll go through and delete my tracks, but like if I'm shed hunting or if I'm just for sure scouting. And I'm pretty notorious. I'll try to always walk deer trails if I can, in season and out of season. And I'll just look at where those tracks go, because I think sometimes you're amazed of like where trails will intersect, and you'll kind of see things start to map out as time goes on. But I'd say those are probably one of my 3 favorite things. I mean, there's a ton of new features, like we said earlier, like the LiDAR layer kind of came out now, updated images, the historical images are kind of cool to go back and forth from. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear from you guys. How OCD is everybody else? Because I'm very OCD with like labeling everything in terms of specific icons. so I've got an icon for everything, and I have a color pattern for everything, which is kind of funny. But yeah, those are just a couple of things that I do.
Nice. All right, so let me bring it back up here.
Perfect. Oh, fun.
Yeah. This one's a little more topography on this one.
I tell you what though, I do love hill country. I've only done it, I guess here in central Minnesota I've hunted quite a bit, but in terms of like where you're at in like true bluff country, I've only done it a couple times, and it's fun, but man, it could be overwhelming and frustrating very quick.
Yeah. Yeah, and the biggest thing with this piece in particular, I would say, is access. You have basically this one road. Looks like maybe some trail systems through here. Would be my guess.
So before I kind of dive into all my questions and stuff, I just want to get your take on it, just so we can get kind of an outline of the property and stuff. So just maybe break down like the first 3 things that you're going to do when you're looking at this via e-scouting.
I mean, access is king, So it looks like if you're just zooming in here, that where it marks these kind of dotted, railroad line almost looks, or tracks, or whatever you want to call it. It does look like there's some sort of
yeah, it looks like there's maybe like a dirt road system through
there. Yeah, so I mean, like, that is huge. Number one. Caveat to that is it makes it easier for everyone to get in there.
Very true.
Thing I like doing too is I like using the 3D feature on this.
Oh yeah.
So kind of get down in here and start to see some of that topography shape out. It might take it a second here to kick on.
Do you use the exaggerated hill features?
I don't. It's almost too much.
It's amazing how I laugh because I do it on our farm. And
right.
If anybody's seen a top, I don't know if we've showed that or not. Like, we have pretty much one ridge, and it's tiny, but we have one hill, and I always dream about someday having a property with hills on it. But I turn that exaggerated hill thing on, and man, it looks like we live
looks
in the
like
mountains.
It's a mountain. Yeah. Yeah. Well, for whatever reason, it's not kicking on, which is fine. Pivot and move on. But something like that is where I'd start to just kind of see. It makes, if you're not great at reading Topomax, it makes it a lot easier to identify things like benches, saddles, ridge lines, all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, going down that road, I mean, I like looking this here. You got this huge ridge, obviously this huge ridge system that running this entire property on. So up top here, you got kind of a connecting, I don't know what you'd want to call it, but like a connecting ridge system here where you got ridge line here, ridge line here, ridge line here. So you kind of got this huge intersection right up in this area, particularly this here. I wouldn't call this a true saddle.
Yeah, it's kind
but
of.
It's kind of there just because you got the, peak here. So you got maybe a little saddle here. kind of, where you get these lines really tight, that's where you really start getting those bluff, especially this point here. I mean, that's probably a better saddle right in here.
Yeah.
Um,
Are you so like one thing too, I guess. Are you pretty conscious of like breaking up, when you look at this is like a monoculture, it just looks like of trees. But like
yeah,
I'm sure it's not though. I mean, like are you consciously trying to decide, is
it's
it
like a
all
lot of,
hardwoods or is it, the difference of that transition of habitat kind of.
yeah, I mean, it just kind of depends on, yeah, I mean, you got some openings in here, obviously, as well from the trees, but you got a lot of thick hardwoods. Um, Going back, I guess I mean, I'm kind of jumping around here, but I'm kind of like just all over the place when I start scouting. Is just picking like I'd maybe spend a lot of time just picking this part or piece apart, and then going up here, and like if this is a true trail, which it does look like it is, you'd be able to get into some of these spots a lot easier. Now, if it's not, it would really limit you, and that's where you'd be able to talk about, maybe putting in a canoe somewhere. And I'm just trying to think of where you'd be able to do that with this, just because you'd have to like drop it off a bridge somewhere and without having to trespass. But it's definitely a big enough river where if you had a spot where it would connect, like maybe right here, like here's some state land. You'd have to canoe upriver a little bit, but I mean, you'd be able to get back into some of these corners where there ain't going to be too many people back there. Granted, so I like really just dissecting it completely and as much as I possibly can. With that being said, here's this another thing too is whether you're hunting, mornings or evenings. This is the bottom right here. This whole section through in here. And so you got, it's not like a great, what you would call crowfoot, but it's there.
Yeah.
Where you'd have, thermals dropping down from all different directions, bottom here, where it's going to be, they're going to be able to use that to their advantage, the deer.
Is that something, in terms of like crowfoot terminology? I guess that's the first time I've heard that one. Is that something that you're staying away from, or something you're just taking note of, or something that you're like progressively trying to find?
It's just trying to find where these deer. If we jumped in here to this terrain. Oh, hold on, I'm gonna have to log into it. It's called Terrain X.
Yeah, I think a lot of people out west primarily probably, well, I shouldn't say everybody out west, but I think majority of people probably use it for that.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, it's got taking its sweet old time. Gotta love slow country internet.
Yeah. So, I mean, just while we're kind of waiting for that to go, I mean, maybe just touch, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more in a little bit, but the importance of thermals. Just tell me a little bit, like how crucial is it understanding thermals in hill country?
Say that one more time. You cut out.
Oh, no. So I was just saying, while we're waiting for this to load, just briefly tell me a little bit, like how important is it to be understanding your thermals in hill country?
Oh, I mean, it's not maybe number one, but it's got to be right up there. I would say, obviously pretty quick and easy. Mornings, your thermals are going to rise as the, ground heats back up or whatever. And then the inverse is true for the evenings where everything's cooling. So it's pulling everything back down into those bottoms. So, talking about like that crowfoot a little bit, that might be a good spot where they're hanging out midday to evening, where as it cools down, everything's getting pulled down into those thermals, or all those thermals are getting pulled down in there. And so, yeah, it might make it difficult to hunt it, but it'd be a good spot to potentially target. So here, I'll just sort of quick show this. This is kind of crazy what you can do here. View shed's not going to do too much for us because this is just thick and nasty. But if you were out west and put this up on top, you'd be able to basically see anywhere that's light. You'd be able to visually see. Now there's 1,000,001 trees here, so it's not going to do anything for us. But now if we wanted to use the slope aspect, and this is kind of cool because this is the direction that the slope is facing. So if I wanted to just turn off, if we're looking at just predominantly those east facing slopes, just with the mindset that there's going to be a predominant west wind. And so now anything that's light is going to be that east facing slope. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to click back and forth on between Terrain X and Onyx itself. But this would show me that like this whole eastern part of this, you know, being able to go back into these ridge systems, like right in here is that bottom. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, there's probably going to be a ton of deer bedded up on this top or ridge system here, where they can be looking down potentially, or even bedded, you know, maybe midway down the ridge if there's a nice bench or something, and we can flip back over because that kind of was a pain to look at sometimes. But you know, when you start to get those benches is where those lines start to get a little bit wider, right? Mm-hmm. And so you get a little bit of maybe of a bench here. There was one I really saw earlier, kind of right, maybe even in here. And so, yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm jumping all over the place because this is a thick and nasty property, but there's a lot of things you can really start to try and key in on.
So you've mentioned a couple of different terms of terminology now between benches and saddles. Is there anything in terms of terrain features, you know, that you would really be keying in on?
What do you mean?
Just like, is there anything outside of benches and saddles? Is there any other terrain features within hill country that you're really keying on? You know, if it's, you know, certain ways that, you know, you're talking off a point, or you're talking off a ridge line. Like I know you're just showing that east facing ridge line throughout that property, or is it you know, a ditch within, you know, a ridge line coming up?
Sure.
I'm novice speaking for not understanding hunting hill country.
Yeah, and I'm not that experienced either. So I mean, kind of learning as we go here. But yeah, I mean, like you got this whole ridge top here where, you know, I like to think that you could have deer running this whole ridge system or the tops. And then again, with, like I said, with those saddles here, not really a saddle, but a little bit of one, where you're going to get a lot of deer that are just moving back and forth because it's that path of least resistance.
So when it comes to scouting, are you marking these spots, you know, the particular benches or saddles, and then are you going to look at them and then verify them? And then what sign are you looking for in particular to verify, like, yep, I need to hunt this spot?
You know, this time of year is tough to be able to see some of that sign. You might be able to see some old brub lines or something like that. But yeah, I mean, if you're hunting and scouting at the same time, yeah, you're definitely going in, whether you're, you know, probably parking somewhere up in here, and just, this is a huge piece. So I mean, getting boots on the ground, it's
how many acres is that piece?
1,083. Yeah. So I mean, it's huge and nasty, but you got all sorts of stuff where, I mean, you even got a new whole nother ridge system over here. And like I said, where these bands start to get really tight, it's where that topography is really going to get tall and nasty. Where
the one thing I do like about hill country, you know, in particular to outside of ag country, I guess, of where it's like you could have those historical ridge lines, you know, like you talk about Uncle Leroy sits in the same stand every year and kills a big buck. Well, you know, in particular, you might be in a spot where it's just there's just historical sign that those deer run that time at that time of year. So I mean, like that's where I love hunting hill country when it gets to be like early, early. I shouldn't say my God, early season. Talking like later October, early November when they're really running scrape lines just before the
Right.
rut's about to really kick off, and then that latter part of the season of the rut when they're desperately seeking does and they're just cruising. That's some of my favorite times to be hunting in hill country in particular, because you never know, because you could get a deer that's coming from 2 miles away that lived on a whole different ridge system that just particularly made it to this place.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the only obviously woods in this area because there's woods everywhere. So yeah, you could potentially get a buck come from the north, something like that, that ran this whole ridge line down and into this property, and all of a sudden, like honestly, like my if I was gonna hunt this, I would really focus in on where that terrain X showed us, where that those leeward slopes are, those leeward ridge lines or hillsides, because odds are there's going to be a lot of deer bedded up on this section here, because they're going to be looking down with their wind blowing. If you're thinking about it that way, if it's like a northwesternly wind, their scent's getting blown down into that bottom, but they're also able to see that whole bottom plus smell anything from behind them. So it makes it really hard to try and get in on these deer.
Yeah. How important is food and water? Like when you're talking hill country, sometimes like there isn't, maybe some where there's places where there's ponds, I guess, or maybe like it does look like there's potentially maybe some creek systems that are in here. Like, but how important is food and water in how you're hunting that?
Oh, I mean, you're taking note of that obviously as well. So like, there's a ton of acorns in here. Just throwing on the oak map. You got oak trees throughout this entire property, so you get some of those first acorn drops. That's going to be a huge key thing to key in on. Water. You got a huge river system running down the whole southern edge of this property. Like you said, I doubt there's probably a creek right here. Could be if it's really wet, maybe, but I doubt it. Like I said, this thing is, it's like sometimes I almost wish they didn't have it on there, because it's kind of deceiving. It'll be very deceiving sometimes, especially out west.
Yeah. You should pull up the LiDAR feature on this
Oh,
one.
yeah.
I'd be
Good
curious
point.
to see how much that cuts through the canopy cover.
Pretty good. I mean, let me see if I can
think-
just.
Yeah, keep zooming in. I just want to see, because I know the cool thing, or maybe it isn't on this map. The cool thing
I
with
think
LiDAR,
it's kind of. I think it's kind of. I mean, I think that's that just came out, so it may not be everywhere where it's super detailed.
I look at it like with LiDAR features, especially when you're talking about heavy, dense cover like this is, where you might not be able to see that true saddle or that bench that exists, and you can really pick out those little minute details, because
Oh, right.
there might be a half-acre bench that, on the big scope of the map, it just looks like it's a typical ridgeline, but then you get there, boots on the ground, and you're like looking around, you're like, well, this is a hell of a spot. I didn't see it on the map. And then, I mean, that's the cool thing about, when it's working, but like when, with LiDAR, you can pick out those minute details of like the cutouts of the terrain and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a key thing too with hill country, and I'm going to turn back hybrid just to look at this, where you really start to get these super tight lines. Like I said, that's where you're going to get a really big topography change. That's probably bluffs, that kind of stuff, is that you can kind of try and take advantage of that a little bit by using them potentially to keep deer from circling downwind of you. If you're, I'm trying to think of how I would want to do this, but like let's say, because this isn't probably too crazy of a bluff right here, but if you use this to, it's kind of like using a water source or a river system where you're cutting that whole backside of you off, where that deer, if he's going to try and circle downwind you, odds are he's coming right underneath you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So just, like you said with farm country, there's a million and one things that you got to try and take into consideration. And this only helps a little bit before you can get boots on the ground, so you're not going completely blind. But I mean, even over here, you got, I don't think there's water, but
Almost looks like there was a clear cut there.
yeah, I mean, like here's probably a good, you're talking right here?
Their end to the left of there. It's hard to say.
Yeah. Yep.
So maybe just give me, before we kind of close it up on hill country here, just give me a stand location. Give me some tips on like how you're going to access that stand location, and then maybe some pieces of equipment. Like I think for sure like milkweed's one of them, of like how
Yeah.
you're utilizing that to help you to understand, is my setup in the right spot? Saying that you're either hunting in morning or evening. Just maybe map out one spot that you think would be a good spot to sit.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, like you're going to probably, you got a kind of a clear cut here, which is probably a power line. But I'm guessing you'd probably park somewhere here, walk in. Like I said, this looks like there is some sort of trail in there.
Yeah, just like
So
a
I would,
dirt
I
track.
would, I would use that.
E-bike it.
Yeah, yeah, right. If you can, right?
I'd be curious if that's legal in Wisconsin. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it would probably depend on what sort of state land it is. Just like out west, like you can't just e-bike it in on anything. It's got to be, I think, just
Read your reg books.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But I'd probably use this trail system right here. Like I said, I really like this piece over here. You do kind of have a little bit of a pinch point between top here and a top here. So, and it does open up a little bit. So I'd probably focus in on somewhere, putting up a stand somewhere in here. And a lot of it's just going to be like, all right, I hang a stand just off this, maybe this little bench right here.
Yeah.
Because my wind's going to drop down in here in the evening. So if that's the case, I'm probably going to hunt, just focusing in on this right here. Like if it's the evening, I'm probably going to hunt or put a stand on this line and have my wind drop down. But if it's in the morning, I may move across, maybe go up a little higher elevation, because if there's a true trail system running through this ridge line, I want to hunt above it in the morning and I want to hunt below it, in the evening kind of thing.
Yeah. That's money, man. Yeah, one of my funniest hill country moments was hunting here in central Minnesota over by Mille Lacs, actually. And I got out to my stand. This is like when we first moved up here. I had no idea up from down what the hell I was doing. I just picked spots and went out there and hunted and just kind of learned. And I got to a spot early in the morning. We're talking like this is a week before gun in Minnesota, and I must have got out there at like 4:30 and hunted really high up on a ridge. Thought I was going to be in a spot that was just pretty much was an outlook stand I was going to be able to see long enough. Well, not understanding anything about bedding, how these deer are bedding, transitioning with their, with the wind and just cover and stuff like that. I end up getting set up quietly within probably about 65 yards of a buck, and have that buck literally track my scent trail to my tree. I'm like 2 sticks up, and got this, I don't know, probably 130-inch 8-pointer just staring at me from like 2 yards away, and I'm just like, oh, nice, all right, see you later.
Yeah, that's great.
No
love
bone.
that.
Yeah,
No,
fun.
that's tough.
Cool, man. I feel like that's I feel like I said, it's kind of just a brief overview of the two, and it's just from knowledge of what we've had time in the woods and what we've learned listening to some other more credible people that have done it better than us. But it's I think the thing with both of us that Luke and I are just trying to reiterate to you guys is like, you could do only so much from e-scouting, but in terms of what you can do nowadays, it's wild. You could do so many things that are going to save you leg time, scouting time, to where you can get out in the field and verify information so much faster than just spending hours and hours of just getting, you can go in for a strike or go in for a kill and be a heck of a lot more efficient with your time. I think that's the greatest power of this tool, is like you're killing time obviously behind a computer, but you're killing time and saving time from getting boots on the ground. But you still, I think that's the most important key of it, is like you still got to get boots on the ground and verify information.
Yeah. I mean, 2 things we didn't really touch on, and we don't need to go into super, detail on, but with Onyx, you can do historic maps a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd be able to see some of these properties, especially hill country, potentially where, once the leaves drop, that kind of thing. So you might be able to see some features a little bit better. Now that they're starting to bring in LiDAR, that's going to help, with that. The other thing is offline maps, utilizing that with your phone.
Ooh, that's a big one.
Yeah, because I would guess in that hill country piece we were looking at, service would be spotty at best. So then it gets even worse more out west you go.
If you have that's incredible tip right there, because I do that. That's probably one thing I should have said earlier. That's one thing I do all the time, because there's nothing more frustrating than getting to a spot. You get deep into a spot, and then you're looking at Onyx.
Nothing's working.
Well, it's a blurry green blob. Nice.
Yeah.
So download your maps. I don't think maybe there's a data limit. I could be wrong. I've never reached it, and I've probably have, I don't know, 100,000 acres mapped off probably at this point. Map it off, save it, especially if it's a spot that you're going to hunt, or if you have an idea like you're going to go to it and it looks like it is gnarly, like it takes 2 seconds, map it off.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll save you, because if you can't do anything on Onyx, you have no idea where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Not being able to mark spots, or especially if you're going into a spot blind that you're just e-scouting, okay, I want to get to, that pinch point that we were talking about earlier.
I guess
you may get there, but it'll be a lot harder.
Yeah. 2 other things I'm going to give quick tips here before we jump off. But I would say one thing I'm always doing on public ground is I'm marking sign from people. Like I said, I'm always hunting people more than I'm hunting deer. I'm doing both at the same time. I'm making note, I would say, more or less, of where are people at. Just because I know for the most part, either big bucks are watching those transitions of where people are at, or they're trying to get as far away as possible from that transition line of people. So if you find a tree stand, if you find a heavily trail that's just from people getting in and out, or access points, mark those, take note of them. And then another thing I always like to do too, and I'm guilty of it sometimes if I'm in a rush, but take photos of sign that you find, and marking historical sign. If you're taking the time to go and map out a piece of public and you find a rub, mark it down. You'd be amazed after you mark down 15 rubs of oh wow, there's this ridge line. Here's this historical ridge line of rubs that I just found, or same thing vice versa for scrapes. Sometimes I feel like in hill country, scrape lines can get monotonous, especially if you're on a bench, or what do you want to call it, up top on a plateau where there might be 50 scrapes within a 2 acre piece, and they're just random. There really is no correlation to them. But if you mark your sign, yeah, sometimes you have to go back through and delete some of it. But if you take the time to mark it as you go on that first time in the woods, I think you'd be really amazed of seeing how much sign is actually in that woods, and how those correlate to maybe where you should be having your tree stand set, or your saddle set, or if you're in a blind or whatever that is, vice versa. But yeah, Onyx is a great tool. If you don't have it, highly suggest that you download it. It's super powerful. It's going to save you a heck of a lot of time. And I think it's a tool that at this point in our generation, you kind of got to have it, especially with property lines and stuff like that. I think it's a pretty essential tool.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you're getting deep into some of these, making sure you're hunting where you're supposed to be hunting.
Well,
all right,
guys, thanks for listening to this one. This was a fun one, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through faith in the great outdoors. We hope today's episode has inspired you to seek God's presence in the wilderness and deepen your connection with nature. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to the Wild Faith Podcast on your favorite platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. By subscribing, you'll never miss an episode, and you'll continue to be a part of the Wild Faith Podcast community. We'd also love to hear from our listeners, so please don't hesitate to reach out with your questions, comments, or topic suggestions. You can connect with us on social media or through our website. Your feedback is important to us and helps us improve and tailor our content to better serve you. And always remember, the great outdoors isn't just a playground for hunting and fishing. It's a sanctuary for finding solace and spiritual renewal. As you gear up for that next adventure, I pray you find God's presence in the crackling of a campfire, the thrill of reeling in your catch, or the quiet solitude found in nature. Until next time, thank you for listening to the Wild Faith Podcast. Take care, and God bless.